Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Electronic Record Systems and Investigations, presented by Lieutenant Jordan Satinsky from the Montgomery County Police Department. Lieutenant Jordan Satinsky is currently the Deputy Commander of a district station in the Montgomery County Police Department. He has been a law enforcement officer since 1999. Lieutenant Satinsky has worked as a patrol officer, an investigator, a patrol supervisor, and an investigative supervisor. During his career, Lieutenant Satinsky has investigated property crimes, child sex and physical abuse, adult sex crimes, elder vulnerable adult abuse, domestic violence, and homicide. Lieutenant Satinsky founded the Sex Assault Unit for the county police and was instrumental in integrating the police department in the local Family Justice Center. He is a police instructor for investigations and leadership. He travels across the country to teach members of police departments and allied agencies. Lieutenant Satinsky is also a member of the Safer Working Group. Lieutenant Satinsky's career allowed him to develop an adult sex crimes unit in a major county police agency. He not only created the unit, but he also trained the detectives assigned to the unit. Lieutenant Satinsky firmly believes in victims and that investigators need to be sensitive to victims' needs. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Lieutenant Satinsky.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar on the Electronics Record System and Investigations. Before we get started, it's important to note that this webinar was sponsored by a grant from NIJ and BJA, and anything that's said within this grant are my opinions only and not the opinions of any other government agency or RTI. So let's get started. So when we're looking at an electronics record system for investigations, we're going to look at a few things. We're going to look at why and considerations, putting the system together, what sort of information should be tracked, who's this effective for, are there any public benefits, and then we'll summarize this. So let's start with an overview. Some years ago, NIJ put together the National Best Practices for Sex Assault Kits. They brought together subject matter experts in sex assault cases from all around the country and developed this multidisciplinary guide. Recommendations were made to improve investigative work and primarily the victim experience in these criminal investigations. These recommendations were victim-centered and trauma-informed. Of these recommendations, one of these, which is what we're going to touch on, is recommendation number 23. Law enforcement agencies should implement electronic records management systems that incorporate investigative workflows to improve case investigations and communications. And we found when putting these recommendations together that many agencies still did not have an electronic records management system in this day and age. And many didn't have them for a myriad of reasons. Some was cost, some was this was something they just had always done by writing them down in a book. These are just two of many examples. So what is this system? Why is it important, and what should we have in it? First of all, because we're going to have victims' information in here, as well as MOs and all sorts of characteristics and patterns, it's very important that this system is secure and only available to the right people. So having it on a public website is not a good idea. It's good for the supervisor and the executive in charge of the division or unit to be able to monitor the overall case assignments. This real-time look at case assignments in your sex assault unit especially is great for supervisors and for the investigators. Supervisors, we can see case status, how many cases each person has, and their closure rates. We can also use this information to say, well, we need more money in some aspects, or maybe even more personnel. By capturing this data in electronic format, it makes it easy to pull the information out and apply for grants as necessary. And really, I haven't been anywhere in any investigative unit, especially a sex assault unit, where someone hasn't said we need more people. This is a great way to show that needs to happen. So what are some of the considerations for the system? Realistically, cost is a consideration. There are many companies out there that will charge some on a sliding scale, some on a flat fee per year to agencies for their case management systems. And some of those prices are exorbitant and out of reach of some agencies, which is understandable. So it's important to look inward for your programming help. There are officers that sometimes have a keen programming interest, or you might have civilians or nearby university degree programs that you could reach out to ask, hey, I need someone to help me develop a case management system. And you provide them with the parameters, and hopefully they can assist you at no cost or minimal cost. Well, okay, we're going to build this system. We figured out our cost at this point. What other considerations do we have to have? Okay, who's going to have access? Obviously the investigators, the investigative supervisors, and the investigative executive supervisors. Does your state's attorney's office or prosecutor's office have access? Do you have a relationship which would allow for that access? The sheriff's office, if you work with those, if as a police agency, if you work directly with the sheriff's office or vice versa, will there be the ability to share that information? Victim advocates and the crime laboratory. Once you decide what to bring together, what agencies should be involved, you need to bring those people in to figure out what do they need from your system. I can tell you, having helped build the Family Justice Center and bring allied agencies together, as a matter of fact, everything that's on that list in front of you, we shared almost everything with each of those groups in order to facilitate the most positive victim investigation, trauma-informed victim investigation when it came to sex assaults or anything else that we did. How will you host the system? Is it going to be something that you just put in the cloud? Is it going to be something you host on your own server? Are you buying the server? These are more cost considerations that you have to have. Will there be confidentiality issues, especially in the cloud? Who is going to own that data if you use a private entity? So you need to engage your local attorney's office or your departmental attorney to figure out those types of information sharing agreements when engaging with a private entity. And then you'd have to go through the requests for proposals and contracts to have the system built if you go down that road. So at this point, we've discussed the cost, we've discussed the need, and we've discussed who should be in part of it. Now we're getting the system. How are we going to do this? How are we going to put this out there into our police department and our allied agencies? Is it something we just throw out there and hope for the best, or take a scaled, slow approach and hopefully get effective buy-in from all the players involved in your electronic management system? First of all, make sure everyone knows. I can't tell you how many times as a police officer I have heard, we're just doing X or we're just doing Y. And there's no reason. And when we go to implement it, it was very obvious that nothing was ever tested and things looked good on paper. Get the group together. Make sure everybody's on the same page. Do a soft test first. Don't scrap your old method yet. Do both for a little while. Show that the electronic management system works. Find those faults. Address the faults in the system. And then at the end of some prescribed time, whatever you decide as an agency or group of agencies, get together and say, okay, we've addressed these faults. It's time to go live now. And it's time to stop using our pen and paper, if that's what we're using, or index cards, whatever previous non-electronic method you were using, and move into the electronic system. So what other stuff should be tracked in this electronic system? Well, obviously, basic case information, the data was assigned to the investigator, the time between investigative assignments. So in other words, when the case gets assigned to the case is closed. That's very, very important because many times I hear this from a lot of people, especially in our world, in the sex assault world, where they say, well, it takes X number of days, or it takes a week, or it takes a month to solve certain types of cases. By having a definitive beginning and end and being able to show that when the case was assigned to when it was closed, however you closed it, and then track that on an average, you can use that to show the need for more investigators, to show the need, to show how these cases actually take so long. Because there are many people, even in criminal justice, that don't realize how complicated, how long these cases take. The clearance rate of the investigator, the unit, the section, depending on what you call it, and the division. The media is filing public information requests for the clearances on our sex assault cases. It's important that we know what they're getting. And it's important that we be able to not only know it, but explain it. So having each investigator's specific clearance rate, as well as the unit as a total in the division for your sex assault unit, is important. And these types of things are broad. Our NIBRs and UCR case clearances are very broad. They're meant to capture things from across the country. So you need to develop with your group internal case closures as well. So if something is closed by exception, and let's say there are 3 or 4 different things under that that would qualify in your agency for closed by exception, if one of them happens to be victim refused to cooperate, make sure everyone is on the same page as to what that means. Not only what UCR NIBRs requires, but what you require in your agency, as well as if you have a suspended open case and you want to close it administratively for one reason or another, understand that NIBRs UCR is going to list that as open, but internally you would have it as closed, and you'd be able to explain it. Be able to explain it to the public. These things have to be written down. They have to be put in SOPs. They have to put in policies that define each internal clearance to make sure that it's consistent, to make sure that as supervisors or investigators come in and out of these units, it stays the same. There cannot be anything led up to interpretation when it comes to these clearances. It's very, very important. And everyone has to understand. We can't just throw a piece of paper at our investigators and expect them to know it. It's important to sit down and explain it to them and explain why. Now, the time between investigative assignments, let's touch on that. Cold case and acute sexual assault cases take time. Tracking this isn't meant to speed up the case. It's important that everyone understand that this, for those investigative supervisors or executives that are coming into this world, these cases are not done in a couple of days. They're not done in a couple of weeks. Sometimes they take months, even longer. This is just meant to track how long and to show the need for other people. And if you have an investigator who for some reason has several open cases and they've gone several months, maybe there's something there they need and that investigator hasn't come to you yet to ask you. Maybe it's time that you sit down with him or her. These investigative electronic databases will show those average times, and you'll be able to use those later for grants and for moving personnel around in your department. I've used that successfully to assist in moving personnel around my department to get more people into our sex assault unit. Clearance rates, like I said earlier, these are under scrutiny by the public, especially unfounded and case closed by exceptions. People are looking at these and they want to know why. The public doesn't understand the unfounded clearance as NIBRs UCR has put it out there, and it's important for us to make sure that we as agencies put out the same narrative and that you have the SOPs to back that up. Same with case closed by exception. Those NIBRs UCR standards that the feds write, we keep that as well as our internals together, and we make sure we make them available to the public. It doesn't help us to hide that. I was able to get my agency actually was scrutinized in certain areas, and I was able to show that we had a standard practice of doing certain things over time, which alleviated a lot of concerns from our county council. Also, the electronic database gives you a much better system in order to watch investigator clearance rates on a 30, 60, 90-day basis. That's what I used to do, and I know others did as well. You were able to see patterns. They would develop usually in a few months. Some investigators went towards maybe closing things in one fashion versus another, or maybe somebody had a very high unfounded rate or very high closed by exception rate where a victim refused to come forward or continue. There may be reasons for that. So seeing those patterns, you can then engage the investigator and ask them what's going on. There might be other things going on. Maybe they just weren't told how to do certain things. You thought they knew as the investigative supervisor, and they don't. Also, burnout can be an issue. Acute sex assault cases and cold case sex assault investigators are subject to burnout, much like homicide investigators. These folks see some very, very bad things over the course of their careers in these units, and there isn't always the best employee assistance or mental health available. It's incumbent upon you as a supervisor, once you see this, especially when you're looking at these trends in investigative closures or lack thereof if an investigator is not closing cases, to address that with your employee. But you should remember to abide by your, obviously, general orders and contracts with your union members. As far as an executive, looking at the high-level picture of your sex assault unit and being able to report real-time values to the public, your county council, city, or state agencies is unbelievable. Not having to call your sergeant and ask, or a corporal and ask, hey, I need last year's data, and they have to cull through it by paging through pages and pages of data, versus clicking a button and it's right there, being able to email it over. Again, this also really, really helps with grant and funding and moving personnel around. I can't even tell you how important it is for those last two, as far as grants and funding for personnel, that this data is readily available and it's live updating. As far as the investigative supervisor, that sergeant or the corporal, depending on how your agency is set up, that's leading the sex assault unit, again, they get a real-time view of cases. They get to see what all their investigators have, whether it's 3 investigators or 40. They can see where case closures have gone awry potentially and identify potential burnout. And they can also see where working with other agencies might be an issue. So if, let's say, you have 5 allied agencies working with you from different areas, the prosecutor's office, the victim advocates, sheriffs, the police, and others, crime analysts, if you notice that someone's not logging in to your system to get information, but they're continually calling you, maybe it's important to redirect them to the system where they can get all the information they need in a much faster pace and in much more of a sense where they will be able to assist in the case, which ultimately assists our victim in capturing the right person. And this should allow investigators to see what they and the other members on their team are doing. There are crossover. There are cases that do have crossover between sex assault, where maybe one investigator who works primarily nights versus one who works days may have similar cases or MOs, especially in stranger cases. By them being able to see each other's work, they learn from each other. They can learn best practices. They can share information. By siloing them into their one little case cubby, just what they're assigned, it takes away a lot of information sharing. By giving them the access in your electronic database so they can share back and forth and they can see what each other is doing, it really does promote much more communication and better case outcomes. So really, what are the public benefits? Are there any? We touched on a few of these earlier. I firmly believe there are. As I said earlier, this gives you that instant access to your total case assignments and breakdown of your division, your unit, your section. You not only get the NIVERS UCR data, but you get a context of why those cases were closed via those internal case clearances. So if someone looks at your data that the FBI puts out and says you have 23% of your cases are unfounded and 58% are case closed by exception, you can go in with your internal case clearances and explain why that happened. But remember, you have to have those things written down, and they have to be the same for everyone. And really, victims understand your agency's strengths when you're out there being positive. There are several people who are always going to look at our as police agencies and try to find what we're doing wrong. It's our job to show them that we're doing the right thing. And sometimes it really is just that we're not sharing the correct information, or we're not sharing information with the public for whatever reason. This is one way to really get ahead of this and allay a lot of fears. And like I said earlier, when we were subjected to some things in my agency, I did share some internal data, and that, again, stopped a lot of things from moving forward and changed the tenor of how our county council, the state, and the media interacted with my agency. So, to summarize, the electronic database for sex assault units, whether it be the cold or the acute case units, it's an NIJ SAFER recommendation. This database can assist in a myriad of ways, as far as not only getting you how long it takes for these cases to clear on an average basis. It can provide you information for your investigators to share in between. Supervisors of the unit have accurate data about the assessment of the unit. So if you feel like you don't have enough people, you can see it. You'll be able to see it right away, and there'll be no more paging through things and taking hand notes and ticks on a sheet. And you can also identify potential training issues and potential burnout within members of your unit. Remember some of the considerations: price, hosting, access, and making sure that you have, if you go especially private, a contract with the private computer development corporation about who owns that data and how they will share it. Share certain information with allied agencies to promote openness and further casework. Decide amongst yourselves in your work groups who should get what and how it should be security access for each agency. When asked, the department has accurate information that they can give to the public in context versus the very high number or high-level number that the FBI puts out there because of what types of data they're capturing. So the FBI says you're doing X or Y, you can drill down into those numbers and show people why you did those things. It really does improve that public understanding. I'd like to take a moment to thank you for joining me and everyone else here at the SACI Project for these webinars, especially this one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. My contact information is there. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for presenting with us today, Lieutenant Satinsky. We really appreciate your time and all of this information that you've shared today. I'd also like to thank everybody for attending. You can view all of our archived webinars on the SACI website. You can also follow us on our social media. We have a Facebook page. You can follow us on Twitter or subscribe and watch to our YouTube channel. Again, thank you all so much for attending today's webinar.